what if the board built itself? Obviously, hand placing 30 tiles for our grid is going to be a pain. Not only that, for each one of those tiles, we're going to need to provide some sort of an ID or an identifier that says this is going to be the item on column 1, row 1, or something of that sort. That way, we're able to target that specific tile later on in our code. Now, in this video, what we're going to be doing is that we're going to do some of the DOM manipulations to allow us to create this board dynamically using JavaScript. So first thing I'll do is I'll go ahead and remove all of those divs right here. We save and everything goes away. I'll switch to my JavaScript file, main.js. And first thing I need to do is basically target whatever that grid or whatever that div of grid was. So here's our grid equal document get element by ID, where the ID was Wordle grid. Now I'll have a function here called setup grid. And what that will do is that it will basically empty out whatever is in our current grid, and then it will enter into a for loop 30 times to add all of our letters here. So I'll go ahead and first thing I'll do is grid.inner HTML equal nothing. So we're basically clearing it out. Now for let I equal 0, and for as long as the I is less than 30, I++, we want to basically create our grid tile. Now for organizational sake and modularization, I don't like to have one function that does a lot of things. So what I'll do here is create another function, and this is going to be called add tile to grid. And what that will do is first we will create that tile using document.create element, and we want that element to be of type div. We'll go ahead and give that tile a class name of letter because that's what all the tiles will be, and then we're going to append that as a child to the grid. Let's save and see what happens when we actually call our setup grid. Okay, it looks like nothing happens, but that's because we did not call the function here. So let's call add tile to grid. So for 30 times, we're going to call this function, and what this will do is that it will create a tile, give it a class, append it to our grid, and we should be good to go. Hit save. Oh, again, we forgot to include it into our HTML file here. So let's go ahead and do script module, and the path is assets scripts main.js. Hit save, and here we go. We have our grid. Now I mentioned that we're going to need to give each one of those tiles an identifier. So what we're going to need to do now is basically a nested loop. So first we're going to loop over each row, and then within each row, we're going to be adding the different tiles per column. So we're going to replace this. I'm going to use the F2 key on my keyboard, so I'm able to refactor or rename this variable everywhere. So I'll call this row. And then within that, we're going to need to do another for loop. I'm going to call this column 0. While column is less than, we have 5. Increase the column by 1. Obviously, the rows, we only have 6 rows now. So let's change that. And inside the for loop, we need to provide what is our row number and what is our column number. And we need to update our function here to actually takes in the row and the column. And not only will we be updating the class name, but we also need to add tile.id equal cell dash. Let me actually change this to use the backticks and do the string interpolation. So this is going to be called cell dash r row dash c column. See what that looks like now. Save. So far as the view seems, it all looks the same, except that now we have these identifiers have been added to each of our tiles. So here we have cell, row 0, cell 0. Let me toggle this on so that as I hover over it, you can see which one I am targeting in my elements tab here. So this right here is basically the cell of row 1, cell 2, which is basically the third position in the grid. All right, so now we were able to dynamically create our grid. Let's do some cleaning here. We generally don't like to have numbers hard-coded in our code because that implies what we call a magic number. Somebody later on would look at this code, and if our code was not as clean as it is right now, you wouldn't understand really what does the 6 here mean. Obviously, because we're using descriptive variable, it looks nice and looks okay, but we can also add a variable here, and let's call this configuration. And this will have a config setting to basically say we're going to have 5 columns, we're going to have 6 rows. And now over here, I'll reference this variable. So it's config.rows. Let me actually rename it to rows instead of row. And for the column, this is going to be config.columns. Now, the nice thing about this right now is that if I later on decided that, you know what, we want to use 3-character words and we want to give them only 3 tiles. If I hit save, that updates the number of tiles that we have, but obviously we still need to also go back into our style.css and update our repeat function. So we can also do that using JavaScript. I'll leave that to you if you want to play around with having this be more of a dynamic setting that you add to your code. Right, we'll switch back over here. Let's fix this back again to 5 columns and 6 rows. And here we go. Now I'm actually very intrigued. I do want to do this myself over here. So I'll go back and let's copy this because that's what we're going to be needing to update. So in the setup grid, we're going to need to know what are the rows and what are the columns. And based on that, we'll need to update what our grid dot style dot, and the property really that we're going to be updating here is called grid template column. So grid template columns, and we'll set this to be, let's put this in a string. So repeat, actually, let's make that string using backticks. That way I'm able to inject a number here. So we're going to repeat for config.columns, and we'll keep that 60 pixels as our setting. If I save, now let's see what happens if I change this to 3 columns and 2 rows, save. My game is completely dynamic, and we've actually improved on the actual Wordle game by allowing the user to choose how many rows and how many columns. So basically, what's the size of the word that they need to guess and how many trials should they be getting. I'll go ahead and commit all the changes that we've done. And here we go. We'll call this dynamic grid with JavaScript. Commit, and we push. And now we're ready to start capturing the user input, but we'll do that in the next video.